sit up straight.
That should be good. Okay. All right. All right, Jackson. New episode of Empires of the Future. And before we get into this, where's Bluegrass Church?
Bluegrass Church is a Methodist church up on the north side of Evansville, right near Bluegrass. I visited there when we were on vacation one time, so that's good.
Yeah.
It's a good place. I have some friends that are there.
Yeah, I like the name.
Yeah.
Bluegrass Church.
You know about Bluegrass up there, right? It's like there's nature preserve or something up there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn this down.
Okay.
I think our sound is good, and I don't need to monitor it. I had like you speaking here and then in here, and I'm like, this isn't going to work.
No good.
This isn't going to work at all. So we're going to talk about a book that called The Righteous Mind, and you're a big fan of the author.
I am.
Yeah.
A recent fan. So this guy's name is Jonathan Haidt.
Mm-hmm.
Haidt.
Haidt.
He is not a Christian. He's a secular thinker. He's actually Jewish culturally,
Mm-hmm.
and he is an atheist. But he's a moral psychologist. He actually primarily teaches at NYU Stern School of Business now.
Oh, wow.
So his focus has not been on business ethics, but if you get called by NYU, probably going to go there.
Yeah, most likely.
So I think he's a really insightful author. Actually, it's fascinating sometimes the trains of kind of writing that people get on, because you can just tell that some people have very kind of like similar interests to you. So the book that he wrote before this was called The Happiness Hypothesis.
We talked about it a few different times, yeah.
And that's a great book. It's about bringing ancient wisdom into modern life and modern thinking, which we're obviously for. It's something as Christians that we're in the project of all the time, but he's trying to do that for the secular world. So this was his next book, The Righteous Mind. He used to be a teacher at University of Virginia.
Oh, wow.
And he taught psychology there. I believe he's a social psychologist is his training.
Yeah, I read in this book, the 5th chapter, he talks about going to India to do some studies on cultural psychology, and he went to the University of Chicago, I guess, where he wrote his PhD.
He worked under Richard Schwader.
Schwader,
who was very well respected.
Yeah.
In the field.
Yeah.
And at the University of Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah.
I might just say right there. And then after this book, a book that we've talked about called The Coddling of the American Mind.
Right. He also
and that book is just about safetyism and about how colleges are really changing, that ideas are no longer welcome. A lot of ideas are no longer welcome on college campuses. They have to be vetted and they have to be safe. And he's against that, and frankly, I am too.
Right.
So it's been fascinating to see how much there has been to take away from what he has written. In this book in particular, I know a few weeks ago you and I just were both talking about reading it, and I thought it'd be great to shift gears and talk about a book about this is an ideas podcast. I feel like a lot of times we use news stories to jump off and talk about ideas, and the ideas that are in here I think are really important for our times.
Mm-hmm.
He, I think, does a really good job explaining why, explaining things like your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed, as far as why people never seem, if they're on different views on anything, to come to terms. How easy it is for people to talk past each other. I think he gives some really good explanations for why people can do that. Yeah. And I think those are the things that we really want to cover today. In addition, I think he's got some good advice on how to be convincing when you speak, how to persuade. We all could do better about that, I would say, but in particular, I think he has some insight on that.
I'm going to ask you before we get into this. These are just two random questions, but they deal with books.
Yeah.
How do you, this is interesting for people, how do you pick a book to read? Like, how does that get into your, as a pastor, you read a lot of books, right? It's kind of part of the profession, right? If you're not into reading books, I don't know if ministry is really for you, because it is a knowledge-based vocation. You're always learning. You're always growing as the culture changes. You're needing to kind of keep up with the culture, even though the Bible never changes. But insights on the Bible and new perspectives are always there. And so we always want to kind of know what's going on and continue to know more about ideas and issues, right, as we preach to that culture. How did this book in particular, but other books, how do they get into how do you notice them? And then also, how do you read a book?
Yeah, okay. So one, this is a great example of something that happens both with books and in kind of print journalism. And I'm actually this way with music as well. I get into artists.
Oh, sure.
I find, if I find somebody, I can usually tell, even if it's only through a book, but even in our day, I often will try to find some kind of talk or lecture.
Yeah.
And man, I can listen to somebody talk for about 5 minutes and tell you if I'm interested in the way they think.
Absolutely.
And if I resonate with it.
Oh, yeah.
And pretty much from that point, if I resonate with you, then I want to hear it. If it's an artist, I want to hear everything you've written. If I resonate with you as an author, I want to track with you. And so that's the main way. Obviously, personal recommendations are big.
Sure.
People who are friends of mine say this is, a book. And this is, there's sometimes where you just hear the same book recommended by multiple people.
You have
it's
to
like, all right, I'm done.
That's exactly right.
So those are the two main things. What about you?
Well, very similar. I remember going to a conference with my, I don't think we were married yet, mainly, so we're dating, we're engaged, and she wanted me to go meet some friends of hers in Atlanta, so we drove down to Atlanta and went to this. Actually, now I'm getting my story straight. We were married when we actually went to the conference. I met this couple before we were married. That's why I'm getting confused. But when we went to the conference that they were part of, we got invited to go. Like, we were VIP passes. We didn't have to pay to go, right? And Malcolm Gladwell was one of the speakers, and I had never heard of his name, right? And he told the stories and introduced one of his books, and I'm like, this guy is fascinating. I've got to find his book. So I started reading his books, and I've read everything that he has written, and actually have a signed copy of his newest book. So yeah, that was kind of like when I hear something, I hear an author especially talk about a book or talk about an idea, I'm just fascinated. I want to read more. But also, like, I really like when, like, Kevin DeYoung or Dr. Moeller puts out their, like, top 10 books. Sure. I will always look at those. I'm like, well, what are they reading? And some of them I'm not interested. Like, Dr. Moore is like a lot of history books. And it's like, I don't have time to read 500-page, 600-page history books.
I'm not going to knock out a 500-page book in a day or two like he does.
No way. Which will help from the second question, how do you read a book? But yeah, I think that usually recommendations, you mentioned this book several different times when we have sat down and talked, and that kind of like, well, I need to read that book. And so, found it on Amazon, and I actually found it at the library on their ebooks and was just kind of picking at it throughout the last few months and stuff. So yeah, that's usually typically how I capture or find books. Right. Just keep reading. But how do you read a book?
All right.
This is a good question, and there's actually a great book, How to Read a Book.
Sure.
I have it as well.
Yeah.
For you students out there, there is a way to read different books.
Sure.
That I think is a very important lesson to learn, and probably should be taught to children in elementary school or middle school on how to read a book, because a lot of people just don't know how to read.
So this book is fairly dense.
It is fairly dense, yeah.
Now, so there's certain books where kind of that skimming, kind of checking the first sentence of every paragraph will do you. You would miss, he does a lot of research, a lot of data in here, and so you would miss a whole lot of that. You would still get his general arguments. I am a slow reader, and I'm a very easily distracted reader. So this one took me a while to get through because it's fairly lengthy, and the density. There's just parts of it where you're kind of going, whew. Yeah. Like, I'm not too much of a statistics guy, and so there's
and
parts
usually you're not
where
going to memorize all the statistics.
So we're talking about 370 pages of actual material, and then after that you get a lot of notes, about 100 pages of notes. Yeah. And so I'm a slow reader. Seminary was a struggle for me because you push through a lot of material quickly, and some of it really dense.
Right.
And my favorite thing, though, is actually what we're doing now. If I read, I generally, if I read a chapter or two, I'm ready to talk to somebody about it.
Right.
My favorite thing is actually to kind of present ideas, share ideas, and then hear how it strikes other people, and then kind of discuss how you can see it effective. And so this is my favorite thing to do, is actually have material that we've both run into, and then to talk about it and see, how you see it, what use is it to you, and some of my favorite authors and pastors do that same thing. That they look forward to talking about it, not just finishing a book and then you're like, well, all right, next one.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah. So so if you're an author of a book, do not take this the wrong way. But I think a lot of books could really be a lot shorter in the amount of pages. And that's someone who wrote a dissertation that was way too long, right? I mean, if I was reading it, I wouldn't read all of it, right? Yeah. But I think I'm always trying to get the big principles out of a book and squeezing those out of them. So let's say Christian books, there's a lot of anecdotes and stories. Yep. It's I can kind of pass through all that and try to get to the meat. Yep. And so I do that. And there are times where I can read a book in a day because I'm just really trying to get the big points out of it and really see the argument and capture those things. And then I really like to read the end, the conclusion, because usually that's where all right, how do we apply this, right? What are the solutions? I just read a book called Divided by Faith about some of the issues going on right now with white, blacks in the church and stuff. And read a few of the chapters, kind of caught the idea, what the principle the authors were saying, and then went to the conclusion and said, all right, how do we apply this? It was really disappointed. It's there's nothing. There's no solutions. Yeah. So usually, you can read a book and just wow, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of arguments, a lot of premises. And then you get to the end, I go, what do we do about this? And it's I got nothing for you. Right. You're wow. So I just saved myself 400 pages of reading, by just getting to the end and seeing what the. So I think there are some books, especially older classic books, that you really need to read word to word and slowly read it. But I think a lot of modern books, there's so much fluff in there. You can kind of. And this is a great book, and I really like his writing style. Yep. He's a very enjoyable writing style. I never got bored reading this book at all. And I've only read most of the chapters. I haven't read all the chapters, but but I like how he's very organized in his writing. He has an in sum. Yes. Great. Yep. That is a great thing. So if you don't be afraid of a book like this, because if you're I'm getting kind of bogged down, well, go to the in sum and you get kind of a summarized version of everything he said. And you're okay, I got this. I think that is a
Isn't it
great
disappointing when you're reading somebody in a discipline and you go, you should be a better you study communication. You should be a better communicator than this. But this is a guy, he's a psychologist. He ought to know how to communicate. And he does a fantastic job, of this is the arguments I'm going to make. Then he makes the arguments, and he's and by the way, these are the arguments that I just made. Yeah. And it's very concise. He's not running on and on about it, but he does help you because he's going to say some things, especially depending on how much familiarity you have with kind of how people think, with what might be driving actions, how much you've thought about that. He's going to have some new ideas to present to you and some important ideas. Yeah. And so it is important for you to then say up front, this is what I'm about to tell you. And you go, wait, really? Yeah. And then he makes the argument. You're I guess I could see that. And then he just, it's in case you're not sure that you're getting what, I'm going to say it in a very concise way. Yeah. And that is so needed. Yeah. I hope as time goes forward, there's a lot of people wondering right now, are we going to see the death of the book? Well, no, but please get better at being concise in your arguments, saying something, and then being done when you've said something. This is the main reason C.S. Lewis is my favorite author, is because if you read anything the man wrote, it is from fiction to theological works. It's he says what he's got to say, and then he just goes, all right, take it or leave it, I'm moving on. And every sentence is going to matter. It all builds on each other. I'm not saying stuff that's superfluous or extra, not needed. If it's there, it's needed. And it turns out, it seems he just thought that way. Even if you read Narnia, the story moves along. You don't have a lot of plot building. It's just, look, this plot is going to be going. We're going to be moving towards the conclusion from the time we start. Yeah. And I can read fiction like that. Otherwise, most fiction I struggle with. Down,
and obviously we have a lot to talk about when it comes to this book, but I think now more than just about any time, books are so important because we live in an age where it's Twitter can be almost instantaneous with a piece of information or news or opinion. Even an article, you can spit out an article in a few hours and post that online or post that through some social media feed. A book takes time. It takes research. It takes study. It takes editing. It takes going through a publishing company as they publish it and put their brand on it, like Viking Publishing Company right here. They went through different levels of eyes before that thing even got published, right? And while that seems slow, but usually when you have research, actually the book tends to speak pretty clearly and relevantly to a time, even though maybe the book is years in its creation, because it's research. Usually things like what's going on with the black protests and Black Lives Matter, that stuff, you can see that stuff coming down years in the past, right? And if you were researching this, if your finger was on that pulse, you would have been able to almost predict a lot of these things. But and so we're so quick to want to read the articles thinking they're more relevant, but maybe they're like on point because they were written an hour ago, but books do such a better job of speaking more clearly, more even bringing into the equation other people's views. And I think he does a great job in some of his chapters of saying, I know that you may come from this ethics of autonomy, but like those who come from this community, they think differently, and let's look at it. That's so helpful. That's so good. So
let's jump into it then.
Yeah,
so the biggest takeaway that he's going to have is if your approach, if you tend to think of people as being rational, as looking at their life and going, okay, well, what is the most reasonable thing for me to do? He's going to flip that upside down, and this is helpful for me. I mean, frankly, when I was in seminary and presented Lawrence Kohlberg, I don't know if you ever had like a Christian development. Lawrence Kohlberg, his theory is the one that was the main theory presented, and he's a rational choice theory, a lot of kind of like, well, people go through these phases, and some people come to a point to where they recognize authority, or get to the point to where they see the need to work with authorities. But some people get hung up and don't make it, and then that's where crime comes in. And it was presented in a very rational kind of like, well, there's these people walking around, and that seemed fishy to me then. I didn't have any idea exactly what to do with that. But this book, I think, has a better explanation of underlying causes. And so that's probably the biggest takeaway that we're going to get to, what he's calling moral foundations theory. And that is that there are multiple foundations for morality, and that the senses that people have, and he compares it to like senses, that we have multiple senses, and all people across the globe have these. That's where his research comes in, is that he found that it's not enough if just a certain culture has this sense. It needs to happen around the world, and in fact, the one he found to be an outlier is what he calls weird morality, which is Western, educated, industrialized. What are the last?
Rich, wasn't it?
Yes, rich and
democratic.
And democratic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, which is academia and then the upper class of the West, basically the ruling class of our country, who then are giving out values through cultural influences and all of this. And so that affects all of us. And what he says is that group is only working off of a select few of the foundations and leaving behind some of them, which makes them outliers. And so here's something that comes up very, very early that he says. He says, while all of us come pre-wired with the 6 moral modules, each of them stands to be either amplified or quieted, as well as somewhat modified by a host of internal and external factors. The internal factors include our personality, its development, while the external factors include the environment in which we are raised, including our cultural milieu, and the particular experiences that we have, the latter of which help to shape, among other things, our view of human nature, which itself influences our view of what good society consists in. All right, so we should probably introduce the foundations to kind of get into what he says is happening. And I tried. This is something that I picked up along the way. I try to come up with like an acrostic, and so you can spell the five that are definite, and then we'll mention the sixth. But the five that are definite, you can use to spell flask with a C at the end. FLASC. All right. So the first is fairness. Or proportionality, equality. This is rendering justice according to shared rules. The opposite of cheating. And this is one that around the world, and including weird, Western, educated, and all that, that is agreed upon. That's one of the two big ones for Western societies, but one that you'll find around the world. Though, I haven't told you, have you caught the story of where this book came from for him? So he was working on the 2004 presidential election.
Okay.
And he looked at it, and I think he was pretty far on the edge at the time. But he in any talk you hear him speak, he would say he grew up being a liberal.
Yeah. And caught that. Yeah.
Voted.
Even in his academic life, he went from University of Pennsylvania to the University of Chicago, right? I mean, those are fairly similar in their political views and their views on religion, right? And so it was the chapter 5 when he talked about going to India was like this huge blow up because he's like, India is nothing like the University of Chicago or the University of Pennsylvania, right? And it just really kind of pushed on him and kind of his biasness, right? Yeah.
So what happened was he saw that this is the election between John Kerry and George W. Bush. He saw the moral messaging that the Democrats were putting out was just totally tone deaf. And he was like, these people, I mean, and this is a guy, you got to imagine him being a social psychologist, studying morality, and then seeing that nobody in the Democratic Party was able to make a moral plea. And as a result, John Kerry loses to George W. Bush, and he's crushed because he's like, you guys, is there nobody who knows how to make a moral argument?
Right.
And so he sets out to help Democrats in making moral arguments. And so he's like, well, I need to study moral arguments and what it is that are the foundations that we're working off of. And like you said, going to India and looking at various places around the world. I believe he spent some time in South America as well. He found that the outlier were the two modules, the two moral foundations that weird Western educated countries focus on, which is the one we've mentioned, fairness, equality, and then the C, which is care, harm, cherishing and protecting others. That those are the two that it's basically been boiled down to for liberal Westerners. So you're talking about Europe as well as liberal America. And he says his answer to the question of why then are conservatives so much better at making moral arguments is that they tend to mix 5 different foundations. So here are the other ones where I talked about the F. The L is loyalty or in-group connection, standing with your group, family, nation. So the opposite of betrayal, being sensitive to betrayal.
Right.
And then the A is authority or respect, submitting to tradition, and legitimate authority, the opposite of subversion. And then one that he ran into in India a lot, sanctity or purity, tied to disgust, abhorrence for disgusting things, foods, actions. This is the opposite of degradation or pollution. And when he saw, first of all, these 5, and then he began to look at how these still do exist, even say among Western liberals. For instance, we all now, I mean, a few years have passed since he wrote this, but we all now could see, say, for instance, in Sanctity or Purity, that while, say, the average Western liberal has less, say, moral disgust, there is so much going on in terms of food, in terms of which foods are considered good, pure, all of, has to be farm, what do you call the cattle, the free range chickens, free range chickens, and then
grass fed,
no GMOs,
and
I mean, like that this is coming back, And that these things show themselves, whether or not you have kind of your own scheme set up, that these things are human. And I find this very helpful because I can look at these and go, oh, well, I've never run into this, or, this scheme exactly.
Right.
You can look at people and go, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so his conclusion is, again, conservatives tend to resonate and use messaging dealing with all 5 of these, whereas liberals tend to deal with care, care harm, and then fairness versus kind of cheating. Now, one kind of caveat there is that he did say that for conservatives, fairness, proportionality is a lot more of the focus, and so you can see that like equal pay for equal work and these sorts of things would be more, but this word equality would resonate more with the left. So fairness is a complicated concept,
right?
But one there that you still have. So big point that he comes up with. There's more to morality than harm and fairness, and that's huge. Obviously, as Christians, we believe that. I think it is powerful and helpful to see a more finished out moral theory than whatever was the predominant. And I don't know how far reaching this has gotten at this point. This is a few years in now, but it seems if you look up Jonathan Haidt on YouTube, there are so many. I mean, this has gone pretty far reaching. Many colleges have had him in. So I really believe this idea is going to catch on and continue to catch on, because I think it explains a lot of what is happening.
Yeah, so in his first chapter, he tells about these stories he used in like his studies, right? It's okay if I read some of these, right?
Sure, yeah.
Because I'm going to read both of them, and if children are listening, the second one may be a bit graphic, but first one is a family dog was killed by a car in front of their house. They had heard that dog meat was delicious, so they cut up the dog's body and cooked it and ate it for dinner. Nobody saw them do this. And then he asked people what they thought about that.
Right.
And the initial flash was disgusted, right? They were disgusted by this, but they hesitated before saying the family had done anything morally wrong.
Right.
After all, the dog was dead already, so they didn't hurt it.
Right.
And it's their dog, so right, they have that kind of freedom to do that. The second one, a man goes to the supermarket once a week, buys chicken. Before cooking the chicken, he has sexual intercourse with it. Then he cooks it and eats it.
Yeah.
No harm is done to the chicken, right? Because it's already dead, right? They bought it at the supermarket, and nobody knows. It's not like he videotaped this and put it online to harm anyone else, it's efficient use of natural resources. Is what he talked about. But again, there's a disgust, right? It seems degrading, but does it make it wrong, right? So from this fairness oppression thing, no one's being harmed. It's his choice. He bought it with his money, right? He should be able to choose to do with it as he wills. Now, the initial is that's disgusting, right? And in India, they would say that's purity-wise, that's disgusting, right? I mean, that's against what is high and low, right? That's and there's a certain purity, and animals are dirty. Why would you have intercourse with a dirty animal? Like that's kind of how Indian culture looks at this from their moral matrix. They see that as wrong. Where we would go from Western culture, like, well, it sounds disgusting. That sounds wrong, but given that it doesn't harm anyone, it's freedom of choice. I guess I can't say it's wrong.
And this is one of the fun things that he does in the book, to where you kind of go at first like, would it be interesting to go to another culture and study, social psychology and moral psychology? Yes, it would, because in India, they just go, obviously that's disgusting and not appropriate. And then to come to a Western thinker, just your average secular Westerner, and go, but why?
Right. Yeah.
There's no harm here, is there? And then to see, like, I guess I can't come up with any reason why. But this is exactly the thing that he's studying, is moral intuitions. That we have them.
Right.
And what are they saying?
Right.
Where are they leading?
Yeah.
And so...
and building morality just off this idea of harm and freedom is incomplete, right? It's not comprehensive enough. If you throw in different cultures, you have issues, right?
Right.
And I didn't say this, but I can probably say it now. I've been to India, but I've been to Nepal twice. And Nepal used to be a part of India, right? 80% of Nepalis are Hindu, right? Very similar to India. They eat similar food, so very similar culture. They watch Indian television shows and Indian Bollywood movies, so very similar. And you get this, right? In America, when you go to church, you wear your shoes, right?
Right.
In Nepal, you do not do that. You do not wear your shoes in the church. You take your shoes off. So it's fascinating because you go into a church building, when most church buildings in Nepal are not very big, right? We're not talking about 1,000+ people going to church together. We're talking about 50 to maybe 100 on a special day. And all these shoes lined up, right, outside the door. And in our culture, that would be like, well, I should be able to wear the shoes that I wore into the building. That's my choice. I'm not harming anyone.
Right.
But to them, you're bringing the dirty world into that church building.
Yeah.
And so they see that as morally wrong because of where you've walked. And in Indian cultures, people use the restroom outside. There's dirty animals outside. And so to bring that into the house of the Lord would be seen as like sacrilegious, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how, building a morality based off harm and choice is incomplete.
Right.
And I really like how he brings in these crazy examples to really kind of make people think and go, yeah, based off, I guess it's not wrong. It's like, did you hear what you just said? You just agreed with a man who bought a chicken and had sex with it, and then cooked it.
And you can't come up with any reason
why
that's wrong.
You're kind of stuck.
Yeah,
right.
Because you have limited. You brought your morality down to just care. And fairness. And that's inadequate.
Right.
And it props back up. So this is really helpful. I will mention that. I don't know exactly why he is not pushing the sixth foundation as much, but he does talk about liberty versus oppression as a possible foundation. And so this is in response to the need to differentiate between proportionality, fairness, and the objections he had received from conservatives and libertarians to coercion by a dominating power or person. And he noted that the latter group's moral matrix relies almost entirely on the Liberty Foundation. And so you could see, when I listened to a couple more kind of talks and lectures of him yesterday, and he talks about how that at this point he's saying there are at least 6. There's probably more foundations, but these really show themselves strong across the world with the research that he's done. And again, appreciate that this is actually multicultural. He's looking for what it is, what are the moral drives that are within us, and how they can grow into different kind of traditions. And when you were talking about India, it makes me think about all kinds of customs in the East, Japan and China that have been historically very strange to Westerners, but it's there probably is a reasonable explanation for why you generally take your shoes off to go into a house, and you could see it tied to something like sanctity or purity, and like you were talking about being clean from the world and not mixing all of those things together.
I really liked the he talks about one of the things. This has nothing to do with the principles of the book, but when he said that the movie The Matrix came from a book by William Garrison, I was like, what? That movie's based off a book? I never knew this.
I didn't
in this book. He mentions it, and he talks. It's the book is called Neuromancer.
Really? Okay.
And I'm like gonna go find this book, right? And basically, the movie is like a fictionalized story of that principles or theories that this writer wrote. And he mentions this to talk about these different ethic matrix, right? Autonomy, community, and divinity, right? And when I was reading that, I was thinking about, he mentions flag burning, right? And he says that some people see flag burning as it's not hurting anyone, it's liberty, it's people's choice, where others are seeing it as unpatriotic. Right. They're seeing it as basically not thinking of or appreciating the people who sacrificed for the sake of your freedom. And made me think of, like, let's just go there because it's popped back up again, is the kneeling.
I was just about to mention that
I was thinking about that, and like, so what you have here is you have two different matrices going on.
Yes.
One matrix is saying that flag affects it's harmful to me. It represents oppression to me. And so as an individual, I am going to kneel. Or some would say, well, see, it's not hurting anyone. There's no harm being done. There's no oppression being done to anyone. It's someone's individual choice. Right. While others are saying, no, it's unpatriotic. It's not understanding the duty to a country. It's not recognizing and being thankful for those who have died for it.
Right.
And people are saying, well, you don't understand. Well, you don't understand.
Right.
They don't understand.
Right. And yes,
that is exactly what's happening
right there, because you're talking about loyalty and in group, standing with your group, family, nation, and authority, respect.
Right.
That is thumbing your nose at authority.
Yeah.
And you can see how some people would say, I don't see anything wrong with this, or some people would say, what's wrong with you? How can you not?
Right.
And how people would approach this in very different ways. So it's a great example in how we can, if we don't seek to understand this and we don't have any common moral matrix, that we'll continue to talk past each other.
Right.
And like you said, this issue, with whatever we get from sports seasons this year, is going to come back up because it's already in discussions right now, and so we'll see what comes of it.
I love how he uses that he goes back to the movie The Matrix with the pills, right? And he's like, I guess it's the red pill, right? He took, and you're basically I can't get the colors right?
I'm pretty sure the red pill is no reality.
No, okay. But if you take that pill and your eyes are open to the actual world, right? He did that when he went to India.
Right.
His eyes were open that there are other cultures and people that look at the world differently. And he even talks about if you had taken let's just take a Westerner and put them in India, and they live in a home or a family for an extended amount of time. They notice that the wife doesn't talk during meals, and actually this happened in Nepal. When you go and you have a meal at someone's house, the men eat together and the women stay in the kitchen, right? And I noticed that, and I'm like, I wonder why the wives aren't coming in to eat with us. To me, I caught that. I didn't. Obviously, we're surrounded by Christians. We're having a meal. We're talking, and the women kind of will come in the doorway, and we're very thankful for the food, but they don't actually come into the room until we're done eating. And you think about that, and that really hits up against our Western ideas of equality.
Right.
Men and women are equal, and what's going on in their culture is the male headship and the authority that the male has in the home, and they don't see that necessarily as morally wrong, because there's a sense of respect and duty and certain hierarchy and roles within the family that we don't understand very well, or we're really fluid with roles, right? And he recognizes this, and is having to deal with his own kind of presuppositions and his understandings of the way morality is, and he sees this. And if they had gone to his culture and seen this, it would seem as unruly. It would seem like there's no roles. It seems like where's the authority here? Where's the family structure that's going on? Why is there such kind of a vagueness that goes on in the roles? And I think it's what hurts people in our culture is that people believe so strongly in these moral values. They've never actually experienced another culture, and so they're pretty blinded by what else is going on in the world.
We have a very complicated relationship with authority in our country. I mean, I think recently we've talked about King George and the original rebellion. That rebellious attitude is alive and well. I mean, The concept of cool, I very much can divide in my mind two parts of it: rebellious plus confident. That's what cool is: rebellious and confident.
Yeah, James Dean, man.
You know,
Yeah,
and that is quintessentially American. And so we have a long and complicated history with rebellion, and you can go, okay, so what? Well, rebellion and authority is a fundamental biblical concept that we, in our sins, we rebel against all authority. And the basic problem then is we need to repent and come under God's authority first, and then all the other authorities in our life will begin to come in line.
Right.
And so seeing the importance of authority, and then, I mean, we are in a crisis right now. What we talked about last week, leadership in crisis. The crisis is about authority.
Yeah.
Are there rightful authorities?
Right.
How to exercise authority rightly?
Right.
Who should you give respect to? And I mean, a lot of the crisis. I mean, we have like these tectonic plates between the office of president. Most people would say you should respect the office of president.
Right.
Okay, but what if you get a disrespectful person
Right.
in that office? What
Right.
do you do then?
Right.
And this is a hypothetical that I really think, 4 years ago we would have gone like, boy, I hope we never have to really brush up into that and deal with. Well, here we are.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've been in it for years now, and this election is going to be another huge question to the country. What are you looking to do? And not just if Donald Trump is reelected. I mean, because of the leftward rush of the Democratic Party, I mean, at what point is authority just completely thrown out the window?
Right.
And we no longer even worry. In a time where there has been this last week calls to abolish the police, who is the authority catching wrongdoers in towns and cities across the country. We don't think well about authority. We don't have clear thinking. We have to have clear thinking about authority, about local authorities, all the way up to the top.
And I like how he talks about what is the main goal of each of these morality matrices. What is the main goal? And for in a ethics of autonomy where it's about the individual rights, you understand where the ultimate goal is, right? Get rid of the authority. If the authority is affecting individual rights, well then remove the authority, right? That should be the main goal, right? That should create less harm, less oppression, more freedom, more equality, more fairness, right? And that seems like that is the end goal. But if you're coming from this ethics of community, you see the need of authority, the need of structure, the need of a sense of roles, institutions. There's a sense of duty to some of these, a sense of responsibility to these. Then you're forced to go no. That while there are bad cops, there are still structures and institutions that need to stay there.
Right.
And we need to hold them accountable while also at the same time respecting them and honoring them and falling under them.
Right.
But you have these two different groups, right? And so if those groups don't stop to see kind of what the main goals are for these different groups, then they'll never be able to communicate with each other,
Right.
or hear each other. And so, or it'll just become a massive fight, and whoever seizes the day, I guess, wins the day, right? But still, these moralities and ethics will not go away.
And this is huge. I'm sure there are people who would say, well, the side that I'm on, I intend to stay there, and I don't have any interest in connecting with people of the opposite side. Listen, that's not going to hold, because, this week has been a story. I don't know if you followed J.K. Rowling and this issue that's come up that basically she has had a real issue because she says, okay, I can't abide the claim anymore that there's no such thing as a woman.
Oh,
because
yeah.
that denies any struggle that a woman has ever had.
Sure. So she has some transgender issues, right, that she is kind of going back.
She basically says it's more complicated. Now, she will accommodate that people would be transgender, but she says it's not just as simple as you declare it and then you are it. There's more to it than that, so she's in a different place than you and I, both social conservatives, would be.
Right.
But she is being and within minutes. She
Yeah.
starts getting the tweets, but
Yeah,
then
sure.
it's been all out war on her to say you hate transgender people. They're dying. We're dying because of what you're saying. And if you don't understand foundations of morality, you may stand with some group today, but you won't see the shifts that continue to come. And all of a sudden, I mean, this happened this week to the governor, I believe it was governor of Minneapolis.
Oh, the mayor.
The mayor.
Yeah,
The mayor who said,
Yeah.
I'm ready to stand with you. Okay, well, you defund the police. And he said, I can't
Right.
go for
He's
that.
a
And it's like,
Democrat, right? It's
okay,
not
yeah,
like
he
he's
is.
some, yeah.
He was ready to go,
Yeah.
but not as far.
Right.
He didn't go along with defunding the police. So they immediately said, okay, you're done then.
Right.
And it is exactly related to what you were talking about. If you are not ready to go the whole way with us in tossing out authority,
Right.
then you're not one of us.
Right. You're not a part of our march to the end goal.
Right.
Is the thing here. And I think that chapter in this book, chapter 5, it was so helpful. And I think, talking about the rider and the elephant, that our intuition is really the one that leads us.
That's right.
And it's a big elephant, right? Our intuition, what we see in a matter of milliseconds and how we react in the moment is leading the us, right? It's leading our reason, and our reason has to catch up to our intuition, right? And I think people like to argue and say, well, I have reasoned this out. I was like, I don't know if that's the truth. I think your intuition went one direction, which kind of goes with this ethics thing, and then you just start to build the reasoning.
That's right.
With evidence and confirmation biasness that just kind of leads you to where the elephant's already stomping down to. And
that's huge. An insight you have to have about all human beings is that we are fundamentally religious. That this came up talking about college campuses, about how we can't have speakers of certain types on the campus, on our campus, and then the college presidents were trying to compromise, and they would come out and say, well, we will, if you don't want them to be in the main hall speaking, we'll move them to another place on campus. And immediately people rise and they say, no, off campus. Got to get them off campus. Mm-hmm. And the only way that anybody I've heard can make sense of this is a religious impulse. Because why do they need, what if somebody is presenting an idea that you disagree with, why do they need to be off campus? Well, because the campus is our sacred space. The campus is where we live,
right?
Where my heart resides, and I can't have that. That is, if it's frightening to think about that if you're not familiar with religion, and then you just walk around inside of it, thinking things like that no, I can't have someone that I so fundamentally disagree with on my same space. And so that's what moves to the next big insight is what you just talked about, the rider and the elephant. That really what we're all doing, and I'm very thankful. This actually was first introduced to me, this idea in systematic theology class at Southern Seminary, Russell Moore, that typically when we make decisions, our heart is leading.
Right.
And I've heard it variously described that our mind is kind of like the press secretary.
Right.
That our mind is providing explanations for why we did what we did.
Right.
Reasonable defenses for, well, listen, this is why I did that this morning. And if you think about yourself and what you're typically doing on an average day, husbands, think about when your wife asks you, like, oh, do you always hang around? Just this morning, my wife asked me, like, oh, do you guys always hang around for like 30, 45 minutes after you run or bike and just kind of hang out? Well, not all. Not always.
Right.
And you're immediately in this sort of like, wait, I could just provide, that sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it's shorter. There's a lot of, and this defensive, like, what are you doing here? What do you want?
So funny.
There's so many of these every day where people are asking us questions, and we do have the press secretary, and you can think about yourself that most of the time, your heart is like the elephant. Your heart is just pushing along, and there is this little rider up there who's kind of going like, don't worry, it's all good what we're doing here. Very
absolutely.
helpful.
It's really good. And there's other books I've read about this is that people are they talk about even like cops, who mistakenly kill the wrong person, right? They think someone has a gun in their pocket when really they didn't have a gun. people are making assumptions within milliseconds of the decision, and so it's not like they've reasoned that out, right? It's an intuition that says, based off what I see, and I think this is what's happening, so therefore I'm going to react, and then I'm going to provide some justification to the action on the back end. And so people think they reasoned all that out, and they didn't reason all that out. They have these false assumptions, and then they make a quick decision without any time of rationalizing and reasoning through this. And I think realizing that's what's happening a lot of the time. We need to. That's why it's important to think through these things now before you get into those situations, right? Before you get into those. I don't know how many police officers are having philosophical training, right? But these issues are something we all should probably think about and talk about, when it comes to social media ethics. It's like someone posts something, you immediately have a half-cocked mentality, right? So I gotta post this, right? It's like, then let me provide all the reasonings why I feel this way. It's like, well, if you would have stopped to kind of think, well, where are they coming from? Let me try to catch like where their kind of ethics matrix is going on. You could pretty much figure that out, like either you know the person or just by reading the context of what they're saying, and then you can kind of go, okay, I can see where they're coming from, and then approach it with that, that kind of approach. It's far more effective, most likely, on communicating with a person or with a group of people.
Right. Yeah. So some powerful applications of this. I mean, this is like setting us up to talk about some incredible Christian ideas, which is, okay, so your heart lies to you.
Right.
And your heart is pushing you places. What do you need?
Yeah.
You need a new heart.
Right.
And that's the first start, is that, listen, you are walking around telling yourself you try harder than other people. You deserve a little bit extra room than other people. And a lot of things that, if you're honest, are not true.
Right.
You need a new heart. And you can have one. I mean, come let us reason together, though your sins are scarlet, they should be white as snow.
Yeah,
there is hope for that, first of all.
Yeah.
He skips that one, being secular as he is, but the second one we can resonate with as well. He says, okay, if this is true, that we are all biased toward our own point of view, how do we come at truth? This is where he says you have to have science that is checked out by multiple people challenging each other. He says the way we can get at truth is by letting other people see our research and letting them say, what about what you did here? This doesn't seem right. That we let other people check us. And that can be true in a scientific establishment. And by the way, Jonathan Haidt's doing some good work at saying to scientists of various kinds, like, you guys, we've been slipping on this.
Yeah, sure.
Our universities have ended up being populated mostly by liberals, and we're not checking each other. We're just saying, go team.
As long as you cross the box, you check the boxes, we'll let your intuition slide.
That's right. And if we want to get at truth, we have to challenge each other.
Yeah.
And we actually have to have, he says that conservative liberal is a yin and yang. That wouldn't it be great if we had people who said, guys, we should respect traditions, and then guys who also said, hey, maybe we have the wrong ones.
Yeah.
And so he says that as well.
And I think, not to throw this in here, but I think you mentioned the science community and the academic community and kind of secular universities, but I think the same principle works with the church.
Sure.
Just say, for example, what's happening at Southern Seminary, right? There's a jump to intuition that says, well, because it sounds like this and it hints like this, therefore it must be this.
Right.
So therefore, let's go to war against it. And it's like, you're listening to these interviews, and you're like, we have to give people, especially Christians that are thinking and studying and writing, a little bit of allow them to present their data, let them present, and if it's not based off scripture, then reject it. I get that, but let them have that day but read it, like listen. If you don't understand, send an email, ask a question, get clarification.
Yeah.
If the clarification is not successful, if it doesn't fulfill the questioning and the issues, then you have an issue that you need to raise, I guess. But allow people to present the reasoning and justifications for their thinking, and don't just assume because it sounds like this or it hints at this, therefore it must be this, and let's get rid of it.
Right. And I, I know that it looks like Dr. Fuller was pretty hurt from being let go from the seminary and angry. At the end of the day, I am pretty happy with the results because I think that a lot of these issues have probably a little more academia than a lot of people wanted.
Absolutely, yeah.
But they are important issues and things that are going to become more important, talking about German higher criticism, talking about postmodernism, talking about critical race theory.
Yeah.
I mean, these things are not only important in the history of the church, but look to be important for the future.
Yeah.
And if this has served to introduce some people to these ideas, honestly, a lot of times people don't get into some of this headier stuff without some drama attached to it. And look,
that's a good point.
Hey, maybe from time to time, if this happens and we're able, that I believe both of these groups are speaking in good faith. One side being Dr. Fuller, the other being the seminary, saying, look, this is where we stand on this. If you feel differently, it's up to you.
Right.
But questions have been asked. I think they've been answered, and I do think more people who then would have been interested in this now know a little more about it.
Yeah.
And so good.
And interesting about this is that I didn't know much about critical race theory. I heard it was like the big bad wolf, but I didn't really know much about it. I listened to one of the interviews because Dr. Fuller had a criticism on Matthew Hall, who's the provost at Southern. Listened to the interview that Matt Hall did. It was like you felt a lot more about critical race theory, did some more study, and understood the issue far better. And I think other people probably who have no idea what this is, if they just listen to someone's intuition, will assume, oh, it has to be bad because it sounds bad.
Right.
But then when you kind of go, oh, okay, so it's not good, but here's the reasons why it's not good, and I can see why people think that this person may favor this because they use certain languages, but in actuality, I just heard them talk about how the worldview is unbiblical. Right. Here's why it's unbiblical.
Right.
Like, we're not created to get money and to have materialism and to be equal in our materialism and then to have equal power. That's not what we were created to be. We were created to worship God. That's the biblical worldview. And so you're like, well, I don't agree with critical race theory, and I can understand why I'm against it and stuff. Right. And so, I think there's so much fruit that comes out of asking questions, having people talk through issues, reading books, and we need to do more of that. We need to encourage people who aren't typically doing that to do that more.
Yep.
Don't just don't just read a headline or watch a video on YouTube and assume you understand what's going on.
Right, and I think it's an encouragement, one, in our churches to ask hard questions when you're in small groups, to if you think you have a different understanding, engage.
Yeah,
engage. Do not ask faithful questions to your pastor. If you hear something and you're kind of like, I don't know if I think that, please engage. Don't disengage and be angry.
Right.
I think this has been a pretty good example, this whole issue at Southern Seminary, of people who are going like, the truth is important, and I will fight for it.
Yeah.
I will not take severance pay in order to be able to talk about it. Okay.
Yeah. And
if you look at church history, a lot of the clarifications of doctrines have come at times where people said, like, I think we're muddy about this, but there seem to be some disagreements, so rather than let's stand some bad ideas out there, let's get together and come up with what we really do believe is going on in regard to the Trinity or the nature of Christ, the dual natures of Christ, and so many things.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to think that though there are problems today, we do still have people who are willing to search out the truth, to fight for the truth, and to stand up for it. Yeah. Even if it's uncomfortable. So it's a good thing.
It's a very good thing. Yeah.
And that would be the second thing about this this second kind of takeaway from the rider and the elephant is that your church is a group of people who should be sharpening you. You should open yourself up to, and you have an advantage that the world doesn't have, in that people care enough about you to tell you the truth about what may be going on in your life. If certain things that are happening to you maybe are part of your fault, or if you do have shortcomings that, maybe you lost a job again, and maybe you need to work on something there. That's good to have people who challenge you and to say, hey, you maybe are a little hot-headed or whatever. You get at the truth by hearing other perspectives than your own, and it is kind of a praise about the church, that we are different, that we have different gifts, and that we are good for each other. So I like that a lot. I appreciated that takeaway. Not that he brings that, but he looks at the scientific community and he says, look, we've got to challenge each other. And there's a perfect reference for the church there too, that we've got to challenge each other, and a great gift that we have. If we have a new heart, and then if we have each other, that we can ask questions and then trust each other, and to say, really, that's what's going on. Okay. Okay.
That's really good. And we had an example in our church just recently, on some of these things where, again, if we just went with intuition and just let that go wild, it really does impact a community of believers. It impacts relationships and things like that. But if we sit back and let me read some data, let me read some of the studies on this, and you're kind of like, okay, I can see what the issue is. I totally understand. Now, how do we go forward? How do we take what we've learned and take what we see and affect the world for the sake of the gospel?
So I've got some kind of summary questions that I want to hit you with. I think one of the great ways to summarize this, I saw on a website where I was reading about this. One of the big questions, we're not machines, but as a way to kind of abstract this, are we more thinking machines which feel, are we thinking beings which feel, or are we feeling beings which think? Which is more foundational? And so Haidt's going to come out pretty strong and say that we are feeling machines which think.
Right.
And there is something very powerful there. One takeaway, certainly we have lower feelings that are strong, that drive us. We have instincts that drive us. And to be honest about biases. And so my first big kind of okay, the rubber can really meet the road, and we can have a takeaway here. What do you do about the question of biases? How do we check our own biases?
And I'm trying to remember. I remember when you were talking about this, I know he used the example of a baby, right? A baby is all feeling and very little thinking, where a psychopath is all thinking and no feeling, right? I think he uses those.
They have no feelings, and so therefore you can try to educate,
right?
But without any impulses behind it, people just kind of go. So I know you think I shouldn't kill people,
right?
But you've got to understand. I don't care.
I don't care. Right. You think of these people are bad people. So it seems like if they're bad people, I should just kill them, right? Remove them from
I can help you.
I can help you. And or baby, just I want something, I cry and cry and cry. Give it to me, give it to me, give it to me, without any thoughts of the people who have to actually give it to them, right? And that type of thing. And so thinking about that, are you more psychopath or more baby? But thinking about my own biasness, I always think that in a psychological, in a personality kind of study, I always think that I'm more analytical than emotional. But then, and it's funny because my dad is probably more analytical and my mom's probably more emotional in the two kind of extremes there. I think the older I get, I recognize that there are certain things that do bring a lot of initial feelings, right? Where I have a clear biasness towards something. Let me give you a kind of stupid, funny example. If anyone, and I'm sitting at a table and sports comes up and anyone brings up the argument, well, Tom Brady's a better quarterback than Peyton Manning. Well, my biasness goes into hyperdrive.
Yeah.
And I go, what are you talking about? They
Yeah.
go, well, it's pretty obvious, Matt, that Tom Brady's better than Peyton. I'm like, and so I just start throwing stuff out, right?
Right.
And people just kind of roll their eyes at me. But I think that there's a sense of like, my biasness is kicking in, right? Because it's a personal, and understand it's a huge moral issue or anything, but it's a personal thing that kind of goes into hyperdrive. Well, there's other things where it's like, well, let's sit down and rationalize this. Let's think through this stuff. Where I'm not as, pulled in one direction. And politics has been one of those things that I'm really not like totally. I don't like really typically go quickly to a certain bias. I tend to like want to talk about it and things like that and try to parse through some things. And so I think there are certain issues where I think biasness is an issue, and it kicks in, emotions kick in. Where there's other issues where it is kind of like you act like a robot. You're like, and people are like, why aren't you more emotional about this? You're like, I'm just not emotional about it.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's a foundational issue. Is that even like say Bertrand Russell in philosophy was considered a very, very, very logical person. Well, even then, logic is a thing which we value.
Right.
And so he valued, his heart told him, logic is amazing.
Right.
Logic is wonderful.
Right.
So
it's emotional.
Values precede thinking. Even when values say to you, hey, go think more.
Right.
That's just huge to know about the way we are.
Right.
You come to one of the things that was odd about higher education is, like not big. I was first in my family to graduate college and then much less to go on to seminary. It was just like a whole new world to me. But one of the things that was comforting, I remember that it hit me, still, all these people are doing what they really want to do, that their perspectives are shaped by their hearts.
Right.
And that it's as simple as we all walk around, and whether we feel ourselves to be so rational, our hearts are drawing us to things. And that made the world kind of make sense. It kind of evened the playing field more, that even if you think you're above, certain ideas or, look, your heart is pushing you places.
Yeah.
And that's how you get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me on biases, we need to get outside of ourselves. Like if you start asking questions about how biased you are, you're really biased. You are fundamentally biased. So much so that I don't know if anybody's ever asked themselves this. This just occurs to me sometimes. Like, I just bet it's very different being inside of other people's minds. And it seems, I know certain people who are very different. You can tell by speech patterns and, certain minds and certain hearts work very differently.
Yeah.
And that we don't get to spend any other time in anybody else's heart or mind than ourselves.
Right.
Zero. From the moment we wake up every day to the moment we go to sleep. And even in our, dreams and subconscious, we only know what it is to be like ourselves, and other people are different. And so how do we check our biases? We got to get to know other people.
Yeah, and you think of the one source of literature in the world that is, you talk about getting inside people's hearts and minds, and you can't really do that. So God is the one speaking to us and saying, hey, this is actually how you are. You all are like this.
Right.
This is not like a section of you are like this. No, you are all like this. It doesn't matter what culture you come from. You can be from Syria, Persia, Babylon, Egypt, or Israel. You all struggle with the same thing, and this is the reason why you struggle with this thing, because let me show the example in Genesis chapter 3. And so this is happening, and so Christ comes into the scene. He's like, I know everything about you. I know how you're reasoning. It even says, like, I know their thoughts. Like, I know what you're thinking.
Right.
I know what you're thinking before you think it. Like, I know you, and I'm gonna tell you about yourself.
Right.
And you're like, well, that's just too discomforting. That's as some of the Pharisees and scribes says, like, those are harsh words, right? They say, he goes, well, yeah, they're harsh words because it's true about you, and you don't like the light, right? You don't want this comforting light. You want to stay in the darkness, is how it goes. And I think for us, for our biases to be shown the light, we definitely have to be around each other and be open to hey, this is what you're thinking. Hey, this is how you typically react to things. You may want to watch yourself.
Yep.
And the second thing is like reading through God's word and say, hey, the Bible's saying I should pursue holiness. I should pursue humility. I should put others before myself. I shouldn't lead with my biasness. I should listen and consider. I should submit, and so all these different things, we are shown in the Bible. And I think we have to be careful not to just keep pushing people to their own individual opinion. Hey, you have a voice, you have an opinion, let it be known. Well, I get that sounds great. It sounds good. It sounds like that's exactly what we should tell people. But if that's what we tell people, we don't say, but also be humble, listen to what other people say about you, be open to criticism.
Right.
Then those are dangerous teachings and dangerous lessons to say, hey, have a voice, have an opinion, let it be known. But it's like, well, where's the second half? Where's the wisdom that comes with that? So,
God is the ultimate other.
Right.
God is the other that we long to know. He knows all the truth, and we have His Word. We do have access to Him through His Spirit, and one day we will be with Him forever.
Right.
And so this thing that both Augustine and Calvin said, I want to know two things. Calvin said, I want to know yourself, God, and I want to know myself. That intuition was right. That in knowing who God really is, we can know who we really are.
That's right.
It's huge.
Right. He's the creator.
And so this is a great just encouragement that, look, knowing God is so worthwhile for truth about everything and truth about anything.
Right.
If you do not strive to know God, what you will know is just your own opinion.
Yeah.
Your own very limited, very small way of viewing the world. And there's more to it than that.
And
it's inadequate.
Even if you gather a bunch of people to agree with you on your opinion, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, sure, you've got a huge following pushing you further, but you're still outside the worldview of God's Word, and God knows you far better than you know yourself, and God knows the hearts of those people more than you know about them. And so, if it's against Scripture, if it's against what God says, well, then it's false. Yeah. And so, just because you have a bunch of people following you doesn't mean it's right or true. That's a false philosophy. Just because it works doesn't mean it's true and good.
Yeah. Okay. So, last question then, a practical takeaway, Matt. Given all this, how do we change people's minds? What is the best way to speak, given what we know about riders and elephants, about different moral foundations? How does this inform how we speak to people when trying to persuade? I mean, not just persuading non-believers. Every week in preaching, you're trying to persuade, say, a carnal Christian to actually just live all out for Christ. You're trying to persuade somebody who's tired and is not really dedicated to knowing God. What does this do for that?
I think, thinking of another book, but Os Guinness's book, I think it's Fool's Speech, or Fool's Talk, which he talks about the art of persuasion in the book and stuff. And we think about even other books like Don Carnegie's How to Persuade People, right?
Yeah.
And so we think about these things, and the takeaways a lot of times it's not sometimes it has a lot to do with what you say, the content of what you say, and being able to support it with actual research and data and things like that, and good premises to support your conclusion. But a lot of it has to do with the way you speak, the way that you present yourself, how you, as he did a really good job, repeating yourself clearly and saying, hey, if you didn't get it, here's in sum what I'm talking about, to kind of to be patient with people, to speak with passion. Passion is good, but to also speak with a sense of ethos, right? Understanding like, who am I as a person? What is my character and integrity, and how is that being read as people hear me speak? I think people spend less time thinking about that. They just opinion, not or passion, not thinking, well, how am I as a person? And how's that affecting what I'm saying? And I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think, especially like changing people's minds, there's a lot of doing this. This goes along with what I'm already saying. It goes a lot to do with physical conversation in person. in space and time. It's easy to say certain things when the person is in some way not a person, right? And so we dehumanize people by the platforms by which we talk, right? It's like, well, this person's just a profile on a Facebook. They're not a real person.
Right.
They're just a profile. Well, yeah, I get that, but they are a real person. There's a real person behind that profile, and we should get to know that person, right? And I think that in and of itself, like getting to know people in the real world, thinking about your own character and integrity, and then thinking about also the content by which you speak, I think, and how you speak has a lot to do with persuasion. And persuasion is hard. I mean, the art of it's reason there's an art, it's not a science. You can't find a formula online and say, well, I do these 5 things, someone will buy this house. Like, it doesn't work that way. There's an art to it. There's a lot of variables involved. And as Christians, in the art of persuasion, that's why we need the Holy Spirit, because it is so complicated. Changing someone's heart is an impossibility without the supernatural power of God.
Yeah.
And that's why I think in this discussion, if you take the supernatural out of it, then your worldview is unbiblical.
Yeah.
And it's secular. And there is no... the only ways of persuading people in the secular world is through threats and fear. Either you use a gun, or you use, we're going to fire you if you don't accept this. That's not persuasion. That's what's the word? Blackmail, or and so coercion. Yeah. And so if we're going to do this the way we're going to do this biblically and godly, then I think the things that I mentioned are important.
Yeah. This is doubled down. I've read some books over the years talking about speaking and teaching to people's hearts.
Oh, yeah.
Not just to minds, but to hearts. And the importance of, I think about how Jesus says that the thief has come to steal, kill, and destroy, but I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. That he says, you're part of a bigger story. Mm-hmm. There is a struggle. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Vince Lombardi. I think there's a heck of a fight going on out there, and we ought to get in it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I was like, that was a halftime, right? A halftime speech was like they got destroyed the whole half. It's like, guys, there's one heck of a game going on there. Why don't we go out in there and get in it?
That's right.
And I really see that that's what Jesus is saying, and it's a call, I think, that we as Christians ought to be on a quest to have that life that he's talking about. It doesn't mean that everything's peppy. It means that we do want full life, and that if you're in Christ and you've been in Christ for a while and you don't feel that you have full life, please be in prayer about that. Ask other believers around you. You need to have that kind of full life. And then you can go down the line and think about effective speakers. I mean, you think about like a Martin Luther King who would say, I have a dream, and let me tell you what it looks like.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people literally can't imagine a better situation than what they're living through. Yeah. And you need to paint the picture for them a little bit and say, you got to fight through. Yeah. It's worth it to fight through where you are right now.
Yeah.
There will be peace and harmony one day.
Yeah.
And you will see little black children, little white children walking arm in arm, judging each other based on the content of their character. Yeah. That's a vision people can get behind.
Yeah, I actually read his speech yesterday because I was going to use it in the sermon this Sunday, and it talks about the table of brotherhood. Blacks and whites in Georgia. And I love how he paints the actual place, Georgia, Mississippi, right? These during the 60s were clear racial issues going on in those particular communities. And he uses these words of togetherness and community. And it's so beautiful, and you're painting this picture. And we'll probably talk about this down the road, but you're not Martin Luther King is not saying go take what is yours.
Right.
Because they have taken what is yours, and you need to go get it. And he's talking about justice, and he's talking about when justice is present, when there is a sense of peace, harmony is created, and we can't tell people, hey, like what you want, what you deserve, what you're entitled to is more money and more power, and you just need to go get it. By any means necessary, go get it. Right. That's not the persuasion that the Bible says. Like you You want a full life, you just need more money and you need more power.
Well, unless you think you have to have some sort of soaring skill in rhetoric.
Right.
Look, Jesus just walks up and he says,
Yeah.
hey, a farmer went out to sow the seed.
Right.
Anybody can do this.
Right.
But it takes a little bit of guts to
It
just
does.
kind of say, I'm telling you a very simple story.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's life. It is a
Yeah.
picture of life, and
Right.
people are drawn into that. We all
Right.
desire life. This also brought to mind arguments from beauty, things like, there is the music of Bach, therefore there's a God.
Right.
There are mountains, therefore there is a God.
Right.
But there may be more to simple statements like that than we might have previously thought, just because, if the heavens are declaring the glory of God, some of that is already happening every day. And it's not to say there's not a place for reason, but to keep in mind that supporting points by reason and understanding that, yes, people can reason, but often they're reasoning to where their heart wants to go at that moment. So even in our preaching, we should be speaking to people's hearts and saying, maybe your heart right now is lost in a dumpster,
Right.
because your wife's angry at you, your kids yelled at you this morning. But listen, there are more beautiful places than that your
Right.
heart can live, and let me show you one.
Right.
Rather than just kind of going, hey, just trust me, this is good for you.
Right.
No, you want to draw people into.
Yeah.
The Bible's a story we are given of a God who comes and finds his people in a mess and says, I'm not going to leave you there. And that's a story that is exciting.
Yeah.
That has life in it, you
Yeah.
know. And so
Yeah, there's
important.
the persuasion of not just promising them the moon, but instead telling them, hey, this is reality, this is true, but this is how we can move to a better place,
Mhm.
and this is the path I see, the way to go. Here's examples of in history or the past or in my own life where God has intervened and shown us a vision of the future, right, of the unified kingdom, and we should pursue that and find ways to get to that. And obviously, that's the gospel is the path by which to go there. And let's trust the gospel. Let's not trust governments. Let's not trust police. Let's not
Right.
trust power. Let's not trust money. Let's not trust academic worlds and things like that. But let's trust the gospel as we go forward and persuade people to the gospel.
Yep.
By our actions and by our character and by showing them a vision of something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The world is rife to be shown in action, real life,
Yeah.
to sacrificial love. That will catch people's attention, and I think more so every year as the last vestiges of kind of cultural Christianity are going by the wayside.
Yes, they are.
You look, and the world will look twice at genuine love and genuine sacrifice, because their hearts will tell them there's something special there. There's something
Yeah.
unique. And then we back it up with words.
Right.
That you speak in accordance with your actions, and then people go, okay, something's different. And that's a big deal.
That's good. All right, we should do this again. We should talk about a book.
Absolutely.
I like talking about books, and there's plenty of literature out there that are worth reading and talking about.
Yeah.
Some, many not so much the reading or even the talking about. So this has been Empires of the Future, and obviously based on what's going on in the world, we'll have plenty to talk about between now and
Sure will.
next week. So we will see you next week.
See you in the future.